Welcome back. I'm your host, Hale, and this is Point of Impact. And I am pumped about today's show. I can't wait to bring you my guest. This is one of those guests that I've had on my guest wish list since Point of Impact was just a seed, the good idea fairy planted in my head. Is the example of success in podcasting. In fact, Mike Cavaggioni is a top-tier podcaster. He's a retired Navy officer living in Hawaii, real estate agent, real estate investor, and also he's got his own podcast editing service for other podcasters that looking to get into the business or just upgrade what they've already got. We talk about so much, and Mike shares his journey from as a young sailor in the U.S. Navy with a wife and a small child, being caught up and stuck standing right on top of the bubble during the collapse of the housing market in 2008, 2009, working his way out of debt into financial freedom, starting a blog, which then turned into his podcast, Average Joe Finances, which has become a top tier, which you're about to listen to, is Mike sharing his journey from being a young Navy sailor with a wife and small child, getting caught up in the housing bubble, 2008, 2009, and being saddled with a lot of debt or a military income. How he took some small steps to digging his way out of that debt and starting a blog to journal his journey from his situation into financial freedom. How he took a little advice from a sage podcaster in the space and turned his blog into a podcast, which has become one of the top podcasts in personal finance. And now he's become a real estate investor. He shares how podcasting has benefited not just his audience in numerous ways, but he himself in countless different ways. And how it's been a shortcut to success. It's actually pretty impressive how many people and how many different ways podcasting has benefited him and others. We also talk about the pitfalls in listening to that good idea fairy and a whole lot more. Stay tuned. Before we get into it, I hope you listen to a good idea from me. A little suggestion on helping get this incredible episode and guests like Mike Cavaggioni to a broader audience. If you wouldn't mind, take just a small moment to like, subscribe, follow, give the show 5 stars, write a quick comment or review. All that interaction helps get the show out to a broader audience. I'm telling you, Mike's got the gift of gab, and he loves to share what he's learned with others. You're going to get a lot out of this, and I hope you would help pay it forward and make an impact by sharing it with others. With that, without further ado, my guest, Mike Cavaggioni. Mike, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Aaron, thank you so much for having me on. I am excited to be here.
Well, I've been trying to get you on for a little while, and I feel like I've known you for quite a while just through our, various circles. And I loved the show, and I'm so glad you agreed to come on to my podcast, and I can't wait to get into it. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the way you're on, you tell me first, how's retired life?
Retired life is pretty good. I'm sitting here growing my beard out, similar to your 5 o'clock shadow you got going on, but it's a little bit longer. And it's nice to not have anybody tell me, hey, you have to go shave that thing off your face. So that's one of the, probably one of the biggest things I'm excited about is growing a beard.
Yeah, but you're hardly retired. You're hardly sitting back and kicking your feet up. let's say you've got,
No, definitely not. Yeah.
you're a real estate agent. In fact, you have your own brokerage. Is that true?
No. I do have a team that I put together for Average Joe Finances, but I don't have my own brokerage.
Okay. Okay. So you're a real estate agent. You're a real estate investor. You partner with others to
Yep.
invest, and you've got the podcast Average Joe Finances, which can't wait to get into, plus podcast editing service, helping others get their podcast off the ground. So
That's right.
it's not like you're sitting back and collecting government check.
Well, I mean, I'm collecting a government check too, but I'm definitely not sitting back for it. So,
Tell me, where did it all start? Tell me a little bit about the background, and maybe a little about the military service, the Navy service, and then how you got into podcasting and real estate and all that. Take us back.
sure. Yeah. So, Aaron, I'm originally from Long Island, New York, just a Italian kid from New York. The typical, you hear my last name and everybody always asks me, hey, are you from New York? Yes, I am. Right. And currently living in Eva Beach, Hawaii. And how I got here was thanks to the Navy. I served for 20 years. I spent most of my time on the East Coast out of Virginia Beach area. Was there for about 15 years and then spent my last 4.5, 5 years out here in Hawaii, where I retired from the Navy and have since, decided to stay and stick around. Got my real estate license while I was here. I started doing some financial coaching. I was sharing my experiences throughout my life on how I got myself out of debt and to a point where I was able to save up enough money to buy a house out here in Hawaii. I started investing in real estate while I was out here before I got out of the Navy, and I started a podcast, right? And the podcast came about because I had another Navy buddy of mine who told me when I started Average Joe Finances, it originally was a blog where I was talking about my journey to financial independence. He kind of twisted my arm and said, hey, Mike, I know you like to talk and sometimes you can't even shut up. So you need to do a podcast because podcasting is going to be huge. And at the time, he had just started his show not too long before that on resiliency and overcoming some challenges that he faced in the Navy. And, he was already a top 2.5% podcaster. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll go ahead and start it. I wanted to wait till I retired from the Navy, but I said, you know what? I'll go ahead and start it. And I committed to myself to doing one episode a week. And when I first started this whole thing, I had no idea what I was doing. And by committing myself to one episode a week and not having any content recorded, I didn't realize just how badly I screwed myself with that. And the next 6 months, while I was still active duty in the Navy and trying to balance this podcast as well, and on top of that, working out some real estate deals, it was absolute insanity. And I was getting burnt out fast. And that's actually how I started the podcast editing business. It was a need of my own that I had to outsource my own editing to another team because that was taking up too much of my time that I just couldn't handle anymore, right? So I outsourced to a team and then I fully onboarded them and said, hey, let's help other podcasters. And that's how the podcast editing business of Edit Pods was born. But that's kind of like the quick and skinny of where I'm from, time in the Navy, and then how I got to where I'm at today. Yeah, I don't know how deep you want to go into any of those, but I'm happy to chat about anything, man.
I love it, but it's funny. There's so much there, and I really do want to get it dig into. Something that popped out from the description was that it said it's kind of ironic that your friend told you that you should start a podcast because you don't stop talking. However, it's a guest-based interview show, so you ask them a question, then you got to stop talking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
which is hard for me. That became a challenge.
Yeah, well, same for me because I have very little input, having been completely blind and virtually deaf. So I have really developed my output. So having an interview show myself, I've got to learn how to listen far more attentively. Uh, Let me ask you though, in the process of having the podcast and building this thing up and bringing the guests on, what have you learned? What have you gained from the podcast yourself, besides just sharing knowledge with the rest of the world, or having a different media, a different way to, besides the blog, to share with others and help them learn? What have you gained out of it?
Sure, Aaron, that is a great question. And it's one of those things that I really love about being a podcaster is the little bit of selfishness you get to have by asking the questions that you want to ask. And I got to tell you, when I first started investing in real estate, it was before I started the podcast. I bought a duplex back in Chesapeake, Virginia. I was out here in Hawaii. It was 5,000 miles away. And it was like, the whole process was a little bit painful until I discovered multifamily real estate and how I could be a passive investor. And I learned about that from going to real estate meetups. And I started going to, different webinars and things and learning. And then I said, well, after I started the podcast, I said, let me bring on some multifamily experts onto the show and ask them the questions I want to know. And again, that's the selfish thing you get to do. But I was like, I was able to learn so much more by bringing people on the show and asking them the questions that I want to ask them. And at the same time, provide value to my audience, right? Because again, the podcast is called Average Joe Finances. We're out there for the average Joe and average Jane, right? We want to make sure that we're bringing information that's not too much to digest all at once for somebody that may have never listened to a podcast or listened to anything about finances or real estate previously. So I always ask my guests to, hey, explain this to me like a fifth grader. Like I don't know anything, because I want to make sure that if this episode is the first episode somebody comes to my podcast and listens to, they don't get turned off by this whole plethora of information that will, kind of scare them off. Right. So one of the things that I loved about that was, I was able to learn so much from my guests. And like I said before, it's the value that it also provided my audience. And to me, I don't think there's anything better, because my whole mission with Average Joe Finances was to provide financial literacy and provide these different lessons learned from experienced people to make it easier for people to understand and get into it themselves.
What jumped out at me was that you're building not just a knowledge base for yourself, but you're also connecting with these people, and you're building your network of guests, experts, right?
Absolutely.
And I recently listened to one of the recent show of yours, and one of your episodes. There's a question that's been popping by, just banging around in my head for a while now, was about appraisers, and what would it take to get a certification? Would it be helpful? And lo and behold, you've had an appraiser on your show. So it's one of those things where if you have a podcast, you have this platform, you got a question, why not bring the expert on, learn yourself, and at the same time, you're sharing it with others. And besides, the learning, that 45 minutes, an hour of talk time with this person, you've got a lifetime connection with that person.
Absolutely.
I think it's excellent. It's fantastic, and it's been beneficial for me in the short time that I've had this show. Same thing. I'm learning at a far greater rate than what I can learn using internet search engines. And it's not as isolated. Doing it with others and sharing with others. But
yeah, absolutely, Aaron. And I just want to add, one, that I'm super humbled that you listened to my show and really honored, because that's one of my more recent episodes where I had the appraiser on, and it was great because I was able to extract a lot of really good information for people that might have questions for appraisers. And I feel like that episode really answers a lot of questions they may have. But on top of that, my guests usually leave a way to contact them at the end of each episode. So if you have more questions for that individual, you can reach out to them. you know, and that's the same thing for me too. If I have more questions, I can reach out to them. And you know, what you had mentioned about the network, that is one of the things that has been the biggest piece of podcasting for me, is the network that I've been able to build. It not only helped me build my business, but the contacts that I now have. It's like, hey, I need this. Okay, I got a guy. You know, I know somebody that does this, and it's nice to have that you know, digital Rolodex that I have of contacts that I know if I need something, I can reach out to them. But on top of that, more importantly, is it's not just about knowing somebody or having them in your Rolodex. It's actually building the relationships with them. And that's the other big piece. You can't just be a contact with somebody. You want to actually really grow and build a relationship with them. And honestly, having them on as a guest on your podcast is a really big step to building a relationship, because you're helping promote them and their business and what they're all about. So I just wanted to add that piece in there.
Yeah. What the hell is a Rolodex?
You know, I'm talking, you know, back in the day, the little flip through with the contacts, little address book. You know, I was an admin guy in the Navy, you know, so in the beginning we had those little things, you know, before we had all that other fancy stuff, we used Rolodexes. Now I'm aging myself.
Yeah, literally, I remember that little, you know, spool of business cards. But oh, but you're right. You touched on it right there. Is that, you know, that's one of those imposter syndrome type questions that an aspiring podcaster, just like myself, went through right at the beginning. Is not only how do I get an audience, how do I get people, attract people to listen to the show? How do I attract guests? Why would they want to be on my show? And you said it right there, that you're sharing your audience with them. It's a way for them to advertise. It's a way for them to network, and it's there for virtually forever. That little piece of advertising that in a way for people to get a hold of them, and they can grow their network and grow their business. So it's win-win-win. You know, host, guest,
Absolutely.
audience.
Yeah, Aaron, absolutely. And you know, the other piece of that too is, even if you're just starting off with the podcast and you might not have, you know, the same downloads or listens that I have on mine, let me tell you, I started somewhere too. And when things first started off, I mean, I'm getting like 20 to 40 downloads a month on my entire podcast. It's like, oh my goodness, to where I'm at now, getting, you know, tens of thousands of downloads per month. You know, people still go back and listen to my earlier episodes, and I feel bad for them because my earlier episodes were kind of crap because I didn't know what I was doing back then. But you know, it's the fact that it is evergreen content. Like you said, it's always there. It's, you know, it's that little piece of advertisement that will always remain on the internet, you know, unless you completely pull your podcast down. But as long as you have this thing going, it's always there. So people that are guests on a show have it's kind of like a small incentive, because you know that you're going to have your small piece of the pie always there on that particular podcast. And if the podcast gets huge, man, you're in luck, because people are going to go back and listen to your episode too.
Yeah, I forget who it is. That if you scroll all the way down to the very first episodes, it starts on episode number 6, because the first 5 are all deleted. And I forget who that was, but it was pretty funny to find that. But you're right. I mean, it's a learning process anyways for any new podcaster, and they shouldn't be afraid, because everybody knows, yeah, you got to start somewhere. And you look at the first YouTube videos, you look at first podcasts of anybody, and it's rough, but you got to get started. But you started blogging about your own financial journey, and I'd like to back up a little bit on your own personal story there. And you said you got yourself out of debt and you started investing in real estate. What kind of debt was it? You know, how'd you find yourself in that place? And what steps did you take personally to get yourself on the right track?
Absolutely. Great question. And, you know, it actually goes pretty far back to 2007 when I made my first real estate purchase. I was turning 23. So I was 22 while we were under contract. We closed right after I turned 23. So I like to say I got my first house when I was 22. But 2007, I bought this property in Waynesboro, Virginia. I was on recruiting duty at the time in Charlottesville, so it's about 45 minutes away. Really nice country area in the Shenandoah Valley. Beautiful, beautiful area. I absolutely loved that home. And maybe that's part of the problem too, is I was very attached to that place. And what happened is a couple years later, I wound up PCSing back to Norfolk, Virginia. And my wife and newborn daughter at the time, we thought would stay at the house until I found out the command I was going to, the ship I was going to, was deploying right away. So it was kind of like, okay, we got to figure this out. So she wanted to go back to New York to be with family. And I understand, we had a newborn baby. It just wasn't going to work out with her being there by herself in an area where we didn't really know too many people. Mm-hmm. So she goes back to New York. I try to sell the house. And now, mind you, this is during the 2009 timeframe. So we all know what happened in 2008, 2009. Anyway, my house is sitting on the market for almost a year before I pull it off. It was about a little over 9 months, and I pulled it off. And I wound up getting a buddy of mine who was on recruiting duty who needed a bigger place to stay. And I said, hey, rent my place. And I ate a cost. I was eating about a $300 to $400 per month loss. But at the same time, it allowed me to hold on to the house a little bit longer. I figured if I could hold on to it long enough, the value will go back up. I should be fine. Well, come 2012, I couldn't keep up with it anymore because I wound up losing that tenant because they PCS'd. And I couldn't figure out how to make it work. I was maxing out my credit cards at this point, trying to keep my family together in Virginia Beach while also trying to keep this house. And it just didn't work out. So I wound up putting it up for a short sale. And so now I'll tell you, I purchased a property in 2007 at $250,000. I short sold it for $167,000. That was a very painful thing. And I had to eat a huge loss with that and potentially lost my VA home loan benefit in the process because of the short sale. So over the next couple years, it was a challenge because I had maxed out all my credit cards. We moved into base housing, so I was no longer getting BAH. They were taking all of that away. But I had just commissioned as an officer, and it was good because the pay increase was fantastic. And we said, okay, let's figure out how to completely rid ourselves of this debt. But it was a little while before we did that. We were still, it took a little while. I promoted at least once or twice. I promoted at least twice in the process and changed commands. And so I was on the Theodore Roosevelt at the time. No, I'm sorry. I had PCS to Naval Special Warfare Group 10 in Virginia Beach. And while I was there, I deployed to Baghdad. And I was spending some time on boots on the ground with those guys. And while I was there, I called my detailer to get orders. And mind you, I was like almost 2 years out. It's kind of impossible to get orders. I just wanted to see what was going to be available at that time frame. And there was a couple jobs in Hawaii. And one of them was this XO job over at Pac Fleet. And I said, hey, I'd really be interested in taking this job to be the staff XO out there. And she said, hey, I'll pencil you in there. Just reach out to me in April of next year when you're about a year out, and I'll go ahead and make it official. So we get there to the point where we're a year out. I'm driving back up from Disney World. I just took my family there. And I send her an email from my BlackBerry. And next thing I know, I get an out-of-office message saying that she's not going to be in until the next week. But then I get 20 minutes later, I get another email while I'm at a rest stop saying, hey, here's your official write-in for these orders, and there you go. And I'm like, holy crap, we're going to Hawaii. And my wife and I at the time, we had just started figuring out how to pay off our debt. Okay, so we listened to the whole Dave Ramsey thing. We were following the baby steps 1 through 7 or whatever, but we stopped at 3 because we were like, there's no way we're going to save enough money to buy a house for cash. It's just not going to happen, especially going to Hawaii. It's just not going to happen. So we had about $28,000 in credit card debt. We had some personal loans. It was about $40K altogether. And we wound up in a 2-year span paying all of that off and saving an additional $40K into our savings account on a single income. At the time, I was a O2. I just promoted to O3 before going to take this job. And so we wound up PCS into Hawaii with zero debt and 40K in the bank. And we were feeling like, yeah, we made it, right? And we got here to Hawaii and we're looking at homes and it's crazy because even back in 2018, every home we put an offer on, like it wasn't going to stick unless we offered over asking price. That's just the market in Hawaii. It's absolutely bonkers. Finally, the fifth house we put an offer on, it stuck and we went into contract. And, I'm calling the VA, I'm getting all this stuff done and I'm trying to see if I can get my VA loan. And, I call the VA and they say, well, hey, we got a note on your record saying that you don't have your eligibility anymore. Let me look into this. And they look into it. They get back to me and they said, hey, Lieutenant, we see here that you had the short sale on this home. However, the lender that you used, they had 180 days to file the paperwork. They filed it on the 181st day. So here's your certificate of eligibility. I was like, what? Okay, someone's looking out for me. This is awesome. And we wound up being able to purchase our home with a VA loan. And at the time, there was caps on the VA loan. So we had to put a small percentage down because I think the cap was $721,000 and change, right? And the house we were buying was $799, but we got it down to $785 based off the VA appraisal, which was pretty cool. So we had to put like 1/4 of that difference down, which was like, I think $17,000. Wasn't a big deal. We had the money to do that, right? The rest of the money we used to do renovations. And then I realized how expensive Hawaii was because that money was gone very quickly. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was very interesting, but it was one of the ways that we were able to get out here, get our home and be where we want to be. And that journey was pretty exhausting, right? Because besides the Dave Ramsey method, we did something else called the envelope system, right? Where we had these different envelopes for different budgets, for different accounts, right? And we eventually changed it to bank accounts, and we use these different bank accounts for all the different things. Like we had a pet and vet account, we had a car payment and car maintenance account, we had a mortgage / rent because it was in between both account. We had a holiday and birthday account that we knew like how much we're going to spend on everybody for their birthday, for holidays and everything. We knew how much we had to put away each month to hit each one of those goals, right? And we started doing that, and it was actually very helpful and helped us really stay on task with our spending plan. So now we're out here in Hawaii, we got our home, and then I'm like, maybe we should try getting a rental property again and getting back into real estate. Started looking into it, ran into a buddy of mine that I was on Theodore Roosevelt with out here in Hawaii, who at the time I think had 28 doors already. And he was just killing it. And I said, hey man, I want to invest in real estate. I want to do this. I was like, cause my uncle put this bug in my ear when I was a kid, and it's always been in the back of my mind. I want to start buying some properties before I retire from the Navy. And he's like, yeah. He's like, come on over. I was like, well, listen, I need you to help me convince my wife, because we are both kind of still hurting from what happened in 2012 when we had to short sell our home. Like we have this bad taste in our mouth. I need you to help me convince her. He's like, yeah, sure. So I went and bought lunch for him and his wife. We went and sat down. They were showing us their portfolio, what their monthly cash flow looked like, all the expenses of each property. And I had found 2 deals at the time and brought that with me. And we kind of all sat down and looked at it together, and they were both really good deals. So he's like, hey, whichever one you want, go ahead and jump on it and give the other one to me, So it was pretty cool to know that I kind of had the, I was able to figure out what would be a good deal pretty early on, right? And my wife was really good at it too. And she felt a lot more confident after, she realized that, hey, we're doing it the right way if we do it this way, right? So we did. We wound up buying this duplex in Chesapeake, Virginia. And now we started this process in November of 2019. We closed on it February 5th, 2020. We had no idea what was coming the next month. No clue. Because the next month, the world essentially ended when COVID hit. And we were like, what the hell's going to happen now? And I'll take a break from there because, your question was, how did I get out of that debt? And I think I answered that, but we can get into the rest of it if you want.
It's funny. Before we started recording, we talking about me and Murphy just following me around, and then you start the story off by buying a property in 2007, and I started having flashbacks of my first investment in Newport, Rhode Island, when it was stationed at the naval station
What
there.
market?
Oh my gosh! And I bought a house also in 2007. It was going to be a fix and flip, and then I got deployed. I was in Afghanistan. My brand new wife decided to use every ounce of credit that she could squeeze out of squeeze out at the time of banks, and they were giving it away like candy. So, and poor E5, petty officer second class, on deployment, got, I think it was almost $500,000 worth of mortgage and credit card debt. Just
wow,
and,
dude! I was at E5 when I bought mine in 2007 too, and it was $250,000. That is insane. That is twice the price. Oh my goodness.
Well, I didn't use, I don't know why, I didn't use my VA benefit. And it was just, it was a mortgage. It was I think a second mortgage or a home equity loan or something. And credit card, I think Home Depot gave me a $80,000 line of credit on the credit card.
Wow.
It was,
E5, that is bonkers.
Yes. And then she fell in love with and ran off with the contractor. And I left, holding the very heavy bag. So yeah, I have lots of flashbacks there with 2007. And then when you're just getting back into it, 2020, COVID. I don't know. Although that was a little bit different, real estate wise, a lot different actually. And in fact, it turned out pretty darn good for many real estate investors. I don't mind if you want to keep along that line, go a little deeper into that. Sure, go for it.
Yeah. So yeah, February 2020, we close on this property, and then March happens, and yeah, COVID, did well for quite a few real estate investors, but for me, I was brand new back into the game, and I had a tenant. It was a duplex, right? I had the upstairs tenant lost their job and now couldn't pay their rent. I think I got 2 months of rent out of them before they couldn't pay anymore. And my downstairs tenant was Section 8. They only had to pay $5 a month. And the what I was getting from Section 8 was actually enough to cover the mortgage expense. And so I was only eating a little bit of costs for like other things that came up, like repairs and things like that. So I wasn't profitable at this point, but it wasn't killing me like my last house was, where I was eating like a $400 a month, negative return. And what happened is, I was trying to figure out how I can get, rent from this guy. I couldn't evict him or anything, right? Because they had the eviction moratorium going and everything. And even in Virginia, which is a very landlord-friendly state, there was nothing I can do. And so I'm like, okay, I got to figure something out. And even as a brand new real estate investor, I decided I needed to get very creative. And that's what real estate investors do, right? You get creative when you're faced with a challenge. So I started doing some research. And in my research, I found that the county that I bought the house in Chesapeake was doing a rent repayment program. They had, the county had some funds that they were helping some tenants out with paying their rent so that they don't face eviction when this moratorium came up. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, this is something. And I gave it to the tenant and said, hey, apply for this program. That way they can pay back, your rent that you owe, and we'll be square. He's like, yeah, no problem. So I'm waiting for him to fill out the paperwork. He never does it. Like 2 months go by. I'm like, hey man, you ever turned in that paperwork yet? He's, oh, no, I forgot. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you don't even have a job right now. Like, what? How hard is it to fill out this paperwork and turn it in? So I was getting frustrated. So I said, okay, you know what? Let me fill out the paperwork, and then I'll just get him to sign it. So I filled out all the paperwork, put all the info in there, gave it to him and said, hey man, just sign this and turn it into the county. He's like, oh yeah, no problem. It took me 2 weeks to get the guy to sign the stuff. And then he's like, well, where do I bring it? I said, just send it to me. I already got all the point of contacts. So I had him send it to me. He mailed it to me. Now, mind you, he lives right down the road from the place. So he mailed me all the paperwork, and then I mailed it from Hawaii back to Chesapeake, Virginia, to the place so that they can have the actual wet signatures. And all this time I'm coordinating with them. They know it's coming. So they kind of pre-put everything together. So once they got the paperwork signed, they immediately paid me, which was great. So they back paid the 6 months of rent that this guy owed me, plus all the late payments. So now at this point, this property cash flowed $950 a month. And I'm like, okay, this is the way it was supposed to be. Now I feel better about it. But in this process, I had been going to real estate meetups, or actually I should say real estate Zoom calls, because we weren't doing anything in person that early on. And I started learning more about multifamily. And I said, okay, you know what? I think multifamily is something I want to get into. And that's when I started, really learning more. I started the podcast at that time. I started bringing people on and talking about it, and said, you know what? I'm going to pull the trigger on this. I'm going to sell this duplex. I've only owned it for a year. I'm just going to sell it and move on. And now I sold it before the big boom. So I did make about $15,000 in profit from what I bought it for. But if I would have held on to it 3 more months, I could have made about $80,000 to $90,000 of profit. But, none of us had a crystal ball. None of us knew that was coming. So that kind of sucked. But at the same time, I was able to sell that property, take that profit, along with some other funds that I had, and get into my first syndication, which was fantastic. And then when I realized how much I enjoyed getting into that syndication as a limited partner, I said, this is pretty awesome. I don't have to do anything, and I'm getting paid every month. And I'm with these really great partners that are doing all this great work, and they keep me updated. I know what's going on. This is fantastic. I want to get into more. And I wound up getting into 2 more, like within 2 weeks of each other. One with a different company, with somebody that I had on as a guest on my podcast. Mm-hmm. They reached out to me and said, hey, Mike, we got this deal. It's a smaller deal, but we only want to bring in a few limited partners. And would you like to invest in this with us? And after I did some research on it and research of the market, I said, yeah, I do. So I wound up getting to that one when I was already in the process of doing another one with the other company that I went with the first time. So now these both closed within 2 weeks of each other, and I just got 2 more syndications. I was like, okay, this is cool. And now I'm getting paid by these 3 different syndications. And I'm like, yeah, I really like this. And then fast forward to just this past June, the first syndication I got into, it's 20 months have gone by, and they wanted to restructure their debt, and they did a refinance. Mm-hmm. And the asset was purchased for $6.6 million. When they refinanced, it got appraised at $13 million. So they wound up being able to cash, paying off some of this other higher interest debt, and still keep the costs at a point where they were able to pay all the investors a nice chunk of change, on top of still keeping us in the deal and still having the property cash flow. So June 2nd, on my birthday, I got a nice fat check in my account, and I get an email saying, hey, Mike, here's what we did, blah, 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 and here's a 21% return on your money. Just like that. I was like, yeah, these multifamily syndications are for me, man. So, I've been sold on it. And that's kind of the story of how I got into multifamily as well, and why I kind of stepped away from the single family thing. It was a nightmare with the single family, with the duplex that I had, but also at the same time, a great learning experience for me, because there was a lot of mistakes that I made in that process. Mm-hmm. Because I did everything sight unseen. I was out here in Hawaii. This asset was back in Chesapeake, Virginia. I'm doing everything over video and pictures, and my property manager was also my general contractor. 10 out of 10 don't recommend doing that. I didn't have the right team in place. So a lot of lessons learned there, but that's usually how it works, right? You learn your best lessons when it comes out of your pocket.
Oh yeah. And you were talking about you're most creative when you need to be. What's the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. I'm curious though, after taking your licks in 2009, what was it about real estate that drew you back? I mean, why didn't you go a different investing angle altogether? stocks, mutual funds, that kind of thing? What was it about real estate itself?
So I had mentioned a little bit about this earlier, that when I was younger, my uncle kind of put the bug in my ear for real estate. Growing up where I grew up in New York, I had a pretty rough childhood. Spent a lot of time visiting family in and out of prison, unfortunately, living with my grandparents for a while at any given time. At one point, even abandoned an apartment when I was a small child. So definitely not the life people probably pictured me having when I was a child. But one of the things that always stuck out to me is when we would go upstate New York and visit my aunt and uncle up there. My uncle would always talk to me about, what he does for work and buying real estate and what he's been doing with that. So he was a corrections officer for the state of New York, right? Complete opposite of what was going on with my family on Long Island. But he's on the other side of that, right? And we would talk about, what he does at the prison and stuff. And then also, what he's doing, what he's planning on for retirement. Cause I asked him, I said, "Hey uncle, why are you buying all these homes up here in upstate New York? Like, what is the point of this?" And he told me, like, "Hey, basically, when I retire from this state, it's not going to be enough for me to live off of. So, my pension won't be enough." So he's like, I'm buying these properties and paying them off so that when I do retire, my job will be between the 1st and the 5th to go collect rent checks. And that's it. So he's like, and that way I'm able to sustain myself and my family and not have to worry about working anymore once I retire. And I said, that's really awesome. And that's always stuck in the back of my head. And when I got myself out of debt and I was getting closer to my 20-year mark in the Navy, and when I came out here to Hawaii, I was, I think, 16 years in the Navy. I knew that, if I could stay in Hawaii, that I'm just going to retire here. Right. And I said, okay, I've got to figure something out. So after we bought the home, that's when I said, the real estate came back into my mind because I remembered what my uncle told me. And I said, okay, I need to start buying some properties so that when I retire, I don't have to work anymore. That was initially the goal. Mm-hmm. But now it's just like, man, I got bit by the entrepreneur bug and, starting businesses and doing all these other things that I absolutely love it. And real estate was a big part of that. So it's not just real estate, but I also have other side hustles that we talked about as well. I think I'm just a real income enthusiast. I think that's the best way to put it.
This is one of those things that I've heard about the most wealthy among us, the millionaires out there, is that they have multiple streams of income. And even if one house, maybe not cash flow all that much, at least it's, quote unquote, mailbox money. And they can work on more properties, more doors, or bigger properties like you did with the apartment building syndications. Are you still just strictly passive when it comes to you're a limited partner, or have you gone to the general partner side on any of these?
Yeah, so I'm still only a limited partner right now. However, I have been underwriting a bunch of deals with other partners to get in on the GP side. Just right now, of course, the time that I'm trying to get in as a GP is like the worst possible time. I can't find any deals that'll stick, right? So I've been underwriting a bunch of multifamily deals as well as self-storage, mobile home parks, just trying to find something that will actually, where the numbers will work. But at the same time, I don't want to have to like fudge numbers at all to make it work, because if I'm bringing people in, as limited partners, I want to be a good steward of other people's money. Mm-hmm. The same way that the partners I've partnered with were with my money. And I think that is the most important thing. So I'm not going to get into a deal unless I know I'm going to be able to get a really good return for my investors as well. So that's right now, that's the big challenge, is finding something that will stick. That's not, that I don't have to like mess with the numbers or be like, well, if I cut here and do this, then the cash flow will look better. That's the kind of the stuff you want to stay away from. Those are the kind of partners you want to stay away from. So I wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm. The timing, of course, is kind of relative, whether it's a good time to get in or a bad time to get in. And I'm sure you know this when it comes to your realtor side of the business as well. Because if it's an up market and it's trending up, everybody wants to get in, and there aren't any deals, and everything's getting too expensive. When it's on its way down, of course, prices are getting better, but interest rates are going up, and money's hard to come by. It's two sides of a coin, catch-22 sometimes. But in any market, if you can find a good deal or you can make a good deal, that's you're earning your stripes, so to speak. So if it's a tough market and you can make a deal, then you can make your investors some money and definitely build that rapport and trust. So
Aaron, I'm glad you brought that up, though, because one of the lessons I've learned, one of the biggest lessons I've learned, is how to embrace failure and not let it define myself. Right. So I'll share something real quick for you. About 6 months into the year, you're in the war room as well, right?
I'm sorry.
So you're in the war room mastermind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm on a war room mastermind office hours call, right? And I'm talking about a business that I had started doing inflatable nightclubs out here in Hawaii, and I'm about 40 grand in the hole with this business. It's just not working out because I just don't feel like I'm the right guy for the job. Mm-hmm. And for me, I just had a hard time letting it go. And because on my vision board, it was like, this was the number one thing I wanted to do, was scale this business. But I honestly was not putting in enough time to meet all the sub goals to actually get there. And I was ignoring, something else that was working, which was the podcast editing business. So about 6 months into it, I'm on this office call and I was asking for some advice, like, hey guys, like what should I do in this situation? And I think it was Adam Whitney who told me, like, dude, like, give that crap up and focus on the thing that's working. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I know that. I don't need somebody to tell me that, but I guess I do, because even though I know that, I'm not acting on that. So by him telling me that, it just triggered this thing in me. I'm like, holy crap, I got to stop. I got to reevaluate my vision board and reevaluate this whole entire year. So like, I got off that call, I looked at my vision board and I just ripped it down and said, I got to start over. And I did. I'm still not even done rewriting everything, but I sat down with my wife and I said, look, we got to restructure what our goals are for this year and change everything. And that one small conversation was able to do that for me. And I started focusing more on the podcast editing business, which was actually doing well, and started to scale that and started getting some really amazing partnerships there and taking on some really awesome clients. So that was a very eye-opening experience for me. That's why, I look at this entire journey as an entrepreneur, is that you can't go it by yourself. You can, but you'll only get so far if you go by yourself. If you go with others and you have a team, you're limitless, right? And I think that's one of the things that's super important, is that you partner up with other people and you get people in your corner that back you up when you need them. And honestly, it's just a life-changing experience for me. And I'm so happy that I've had, these guys that I could rely on and ask for help when I need it.
I've been in the war room since the inception, and you're absolutely right. In fact, I can't recall any of my previous guests who haven't mentioned being in certain circles, in coaching, masterminds, just going to meetups, surrounding themselves with people that are doing what you want to do, are lifting you up, helping you with your accountability, sharing ideas that you might not have even thought of, and expanding that framework, that mindset of what you even thought you were capable of. And sometimes telling you when you're being a dumbass. Yeah. And it's true for me too. I mean, there are a lot of times where the good idea fairy whispers something in my ear, and I'm like, and I'll put the idea out, and is that part of your plan? Is that in line with your goals? And is it going to steal? Do you have enough bandwidth for it? And maybe it's a down the road type of project, but I've got enough on my plate right now, so I can totally understand. And floating nightclub sounds awesome. It sounds really shiny to me, but it sounds pretty cool. In fact, I do this to my partner Dan, and I do this to my wife all the time. I'll send like a link to so it's like a podcast. It's another podcast. Speaking of which, a guy like you having enough clout to have Brandon Turner in your intro. I'm sure you're familiar with Bigger Pockets. Every one of those episodes when I was learning and learning about real estate, going, that's a great idea. And I'm talking short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, long-term rentals, flip, wholesale, syndications, assisted living. I wanted to do it all. You gotta pick something, and you gotta get really good at it.
Yeah.
And you gotta get it to where it's easy, right? It doesn't need all of your bandwidth. Then you can find something new, or just keep scaling and growing, or maybe do some verticals, But
Yeah, that's always been a challenge for me, Aaron, being a jack of all trades and master of none. And that's one of those things you got to get to that point where you have some mastery in something before you start playing around with other things.
I'm the worst at that. I'm the fire starter. I just start little fires and hand them off. I'm like, here, do this for me.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
the thing. You have the right team for that. That's you've built a good team where you can do things like that. You can have these ideas, you can have these fires that you start, and then you say, okay, look, I put the kindling in, I got the fire started, go get the firewood and make this thing happen. Right. So the fact that you have that team in place makes your job a lot easier.
And that was the point I was getting at, is that, man, you should look at my disc profile. It is lopsided. And I love communicating like we're doing right now. I love big idea type stuff. I'm terrible at the details and organization, all that. I need like that integrator for to slap the good idea fairy off my shoulder and really help me implement. So I know how you feel, and that does bring me to what you were talking about, and just mention about things that run in parallel, doing other income streams. And you have the podcast, you're building this network, you're investing in real estate, got your real estate license, and you started helping others with podcast editing. So tell me about the podcast editing, like the podcast business. How is that working? And tell me a little bit more about that. Go a little deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, when I started the podcast editing business, it was out of a necessity for myself. And it was, I realized how quickly you can get burnt out doing everything yourself when it comes to the podcast. And I said, there's got to be other people out there like me that are having trouble and struggling with trying to do all of this together. And after I got this team put together, I said, okay, if they were able to take the heavy lifting off my plate, I'm sure they could do it for other podcasters as well. So I started talking to some other podcasters and saying, hey, would something like this be a useful service? And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. So I said, okay, we put the whole thing together, and I started reaching out to other podcasters saying, hey, if this is something that might interest you, we can help, take some of this stuff off your plate and make it a little bit easier for you. And of course, met with a lot of rejection because people are like, oh no, I got my own way of doing things, or, oh, I already have a team and this and that. And then I started talking to other people that have teams, and I saw how much they were paying. And I said, well, if you look at my pricing, it's a fraction of the cost. and we do just as high quality of work as the team that you have right now, maybe even a little bit better. And when I started showing some of these people this, they were like, oh, okay, this is the real deal. And so I started getting clients that way. Another thing I've done too is, as I interview people on my podcast, if they have a podcast, I say, hey, I just throw it out there like, hey, this is something else I do on the side. If you want to check it out, I have a great team that's in place that can, take the heavy lifting off of you. And that's the whole goal, is to, what can we do to make the podcaster's life easier, right? And indie podcasters, they don't get the same treatment as like a studio quality podcast where they have a producer that will be in there and take care of everything for them. So we bring it to a place where the individual indie podcaster can get that same type of service that, a celebrity coming in and starting a podcast gets when they just walk into a studio, record, and then they walk out, right? So that's the point we like to help get podcasts to. Like, hey, you record your content, give it to us, we take it from there. We'll even upload it onto the podcast, whatever host that they use, we'll upload the videos on YouTube. We create all the social media posts. And if they even want to, we can also post to their social media for them and do the social media management piece as well. That was actually something we just started doing. And we only have a few slots for that because I can only have so many accounts on at once. And I think I've only got 4 left right now for that. So that's been pretty neat. And it's been a really good experience, to help podcasters out that need that extra help on social media as well. So that's kind of how it all got put together, man. And it's just been really fun, at least for me. I get to sit back and be the middleman while my team takes care of everything. I have a fantastic team, led by my personal lead VA that does all my stuff. She manages all the team of editors. She's fantastic.
Well, how did you find this team?
Well, so I actually had her go out and recruit people. I said, I want you to teach people to do exactly what you do for my podcast, and train them up and have them be members on our team. And then you outsource to them. I said, I want you to take on as much as you can for yourself. And then I want you to outsource to the team that you trained, the rest. And then basically the way we have it set up is she'll pay them 20%. I'm sorry, she'll pay them 80% and she'll keep 20%. So that way she now starts to get this passive income flow. But at the same time, she still has to QA everything. So it's not really passive, but all she's doing now at that point is QAing things. But, I found her, thankfully, on Upwork. And it was actually, I got advice from David Perret and Jonathan Farber from the Millennial Millionaire podcast. They're the ones who told me, go on to Upwork, create the job, let them come to you, like have them apply and come to you, and then interview the top candidates and pick one. So that's exactly what I did. I created the job and I said, this is what I want. This is what I intend to grow to. I want somebody that's going to grow with me. And I narrowed it down to about 4 applicants, interviewed those 4. And I think she was the 3rd person I interviewed, but I knew right after I finished with her, I said, okay, I'm going to finish up this 4th interview, but I'm pretty sure she's the one. I finished the 4th interview, which went pretty well, as well. But I came back and said, yeah, no, you're the person, you're my person. Let's make this happen. And worked with her for about a year before I pulled her off Upwork and said, hey, I'd like to pay you a monthly salary instead. And here's what we're expanding to. And that's what we did. And now she gets paid her monthly salary from me, plus any other podcast she's working on with the podcast editing business, she gets paid for that as well. So she's doing quite well. And then one of the things she learned from my podcast was actually investing in real estate. And she actually bought some land out in the Philippines and she rents it out to rice paddy farmers and gets another income that way. So I was like, this is awesome. So not only is she, she's learning from just working on my stuff. It's fantastic.
So not only did you create a podcast yourself and then hire somebody out to do the back end work for you and all the benefits that come with your own podcast, your own show, you're also creating jobs that are helping others become financially free. Plus, your podcast editor became a real estate investor as well. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
But what's involved in like getting, if somebody wants to become a creator, a podcaster, an influencer, what have you, what's involved in, creating, making a podcast? What does she do, or what does your team do? It's not like you just go out there and declare I'm a podcaster, like Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy. I mean, there's I learned I was in the quagmire of trying to get this thing off, launched for like a year and a half. But what for others? What is it? What do you need to do?
Well, first off, you have to, I always say before you start a podcast, one of the biggest things you have to figure out is what is your podcast going to be about, and who is your target audience? Who are you talking to? Who's your avatar, right? And that's the very first question you need to ask yourself, because everything else that you gear in your podcast will be defined by the answer to that question. So for me, it was the average Joe, right? The middle-class worker that is working in their 9-to-5 job and trying to figure out a way to get out of the rat race. That is my target market, right? That is who my podcast targets, right? So once you figure out who your target is, like for you, right, you're targeting successful entrepreneurs, right? You want people that are out there crushing it, and somehow I made it onto your show. I don't know how, but your target audience are entrepreneurs that are out there, looking to get better and looking for that inspiration, right?
I think
I'm not sure. I'm just going off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think John DeMar, he talks about getting really detailed with the avatar, with that person, like give him a name.
Yes.
What does it look like? What does he do during the day? Very detailed.
Yeah, and you should get very detailed. So one of the things I show in my presentation too is like, for my target avatar, like who they are, what they do, what kind of hobbies they have. Those are the kind of things you want to be thinking about. Who is the actual person? Who is that average Joe that is sitting down and listening to your show, right? That's the way you got to get all the way down into the weeds. And so once you've got that figured out, then you can start taking the next steps. Obviously, you're going to need equipment, right? You're going to need a microphone. And you don't have to go crazy there. I started off with a Blue Yeti. It's a microphone that you plug right into your computer, and it's done. I have now graduated to having an audio interface, a Rodecaster Pro with a Shure microphone, XLR, cable hookup, and it just makes the sound quality better, right? But it was something that it took me some time to get into. You can start that way as well, but it's rather expensive. You can go a more inexpensive route to get started. And once you have all your equipment, you have to figure out, okay, now I want to go ahead and start the show, and you're going to actually start putting your episodes together, right? And by putting your episodes together, are you doing interviews? Is it a solo narrator episode, podcast? Are you telling a story? Are you, what is your podcast about? Is it true crime? Is it about finances? Whatever it might be, right? You have to record enough content to actually launch the show successfully. I recommend that if you're going to start a podcast and release weekly episodes, have at least 5 episodes in your bank at any given time. That way you have 5 weeks worth of content in case something comes up or you miss a couple interviews, whatever it is, you've got that wiggle room to kind of bounce back, right? And I do have an actual, and I'll provide this to you as well if you want to provide it to your listeners. I do have like a 20-step checklist to start a successful podcast, right? And it goes through everything, like, from who your avatar is to the actual launch date, all the things in between that you need to do. So I'm trying to just go off the top of my head right now. But you want to definitely record a lot of content. If you're doing interviews, you want to make sure you're scheduling that stuff out in advance. You want to make sure that you actually have a scheduling tool. I recommend something like Calendly, or if you use AppSumo, there's something called TidyCal, which is very, very similar to Calendly. And I really like it because you pay $29 one time and you have it for life. I still use Calendly though, because I like a lot of the workflows that I could put into it, the follow-up emails, the reminder emails, and all of that stuff. So that's one of the things that I personally use. I use JotForm to collect info on the folks that I'm interviewing. So they fill out this intake form, and it gives me all the pertinent information I need to prepare for that particular interview. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret too. I used to always spend a lot of time prepping for my podcast by, researching my guests and looking at all this stuff. Now, I have them fill out this intake form, and literally 5 minutes before I hit record, I'm looking at that intake form. I'm going over everything. I'm saying, okay, cool. This is the picture I built on this person. Now I know who I'm talking to. Because I was putting so much time into it. I was like, dude, I cannot spend hours researching people that are coming on my show. I have to, take a quick look. Sometimes, if they send me like previous podcasts they've been on, I'll look at it a little bit earlier so I can go listen to an episode and kind of see what their style's like and how they talk. But other than that, I hardly do that as well. So truth be told, you don't have to spend a lot of time on preparation. But yeah, that's pretty much the basics. Have your avatar, know how who you're talking to, what you're going to talk about, and just don't I guess nuke it. I guess you could say that's what we say in the Navy. Don't nuke it, because you could sit here and spend all day prepping, and then you could sit here in the moment doing the podcast interview and just completely mess it up because things didn't go according to your plan. And that's how my podcast started. I used to have a strict script with questions that I had to go in this particular order to make sure all these questions got answered. And man, my interviews were like freaking interrogations, right? And I was like, this is not fun for me. So I wound up, rewinding back and saying, I just want to have a casual conversation. So I completely got rid of the script. And what I do now is I'll just have the topics that we're going to discuss, and then my final 4 questions that I ask at the end of my show. And that's it. And then I tell them, hey, share a story with me. Tell me who you are. And as we go throughout the episode, I'll kind of jump in those different areas that if they brought something up that interested me or something I wanted to touch a little bit deeper on, like similar to what you do. And by being able to make it a casual conversation, it makes it that much more interesting for my listeners to stay tuned. And it also makes it that much more interesting for me to keep it going as an interview, and make it more enjoyable as well, that I don't get burnt out and decide to just walk away and quit.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off right now so I can ask you this question. We've got a format here, and I have a list of questions I need to ask you. So I can't let you finish the previous. We have to move on.
Well, I finished it, so that's good.
So where does the podcaster, the host, responsibilities, got it? Well, not responsibilities, but where does that his or her work, and where does your team pick up? What do they do?
Yeah, so for the podcast hosts themselves, their responsibility is to record the content and then get it uploaded to the team with whatever instructions they might have for specific things that they might want. So, example, if they want to use a specific section of that recording as, maybe their audiogram or the intro to that podcast, they can tell us. And if not, the team will go in there and find a really good piece that would fit as the audiogram or intro themselves. So most of our clients, as a matter of fact, I think all of our clients, no, we have one client that will tell us what they want to use, but 99% of our clients will just leave that. And then my team will go in there and find the best, clip to use for the audiogram or the intro or the caption videos that we make. Right. And that's the other piece of it too. Like we want to make it so that all you have to do is record the content, upload it, and then forget about it. Right. We have some clients too that they'll just send us their link to their Google Drive, or they'll share their Riverside with us, and they have like their set instructions. So our team goes in there, pulls the files, and then follows their set instructions for every single episode, and they don't have to worry about it. Right. Some of our clients like to upload the podcasts themselves to YouTube and to their podcast host. So they'll do that. But quite a few of our clients like to have us do it for them. So we use something called LastPass. It's a way to keep the passwords safe, but also allow our team to go into that account and post the podcast on whatever podcast host they might have, be it, Buzzsprout, Podbean, or Libsyn, whatever it is that they might use. and then the team will go in there and do it for them, and that way it's completely hands off. So that's the service that we provide.
That's great. In fact, that's what I need for my show is just, do a podcast in a box. I just want to hit record, stop, send it to somebody else.
Yep.
And it sounds like if a host wants to do that with your service, they can do that. That sounds fantastic. Oh, before I let you go, because I know we're getting a little long here, and I love dogging with you. I think we can do this all day long. I just want to ask what's next for you, and if there's anything I missed, anything you did want to talk about, now's a great opportunity.
Sure. Honestly, Aaron, I don't think we missed anything. But for what's next for me, I would say, honestly, I really want to continue to scale this podcast editing business.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the clients that we just partnered with, actually not just clients, but also partners, because we also offer white labeling services, so people can actually use our team and say it's their own, right? And offer their own services. But, we do that, but we also, started working on some pretty big projects. And one of them I can't really talk about because we have like an NDA, but it's just really neat, the opportunities that have come up because of this team that I put together. And, for me, what's next is to continue to scale and continue to grow it and continue to help other indie podcasters, grow and scale their show. Because once you're able to outsource everything, you could focus on the more important things like sharing and marketing your podcast, which we can also help with as well with our social media management services. So it's our entire goal is, again, to take the heavy lifting off, but also help podcasters grow their show, grow their listenership. And if they're using their podcast as a business, help them grow their business as well.
Sounds like there's a lot of room for you to grow and a lot of opportunity for others out there to learn and grow with you. Sounds fantastic. Mike, if somebody wanted to reach out and find out more about investing with you, maybe having you as an agent, getting on your show, starting their own podcast, what have you, anything, if anything and all of the above, where can they get a hold of you?
I make it easy for everybody. I have a one-stop shop. It's my name, MikeCavaggioni.com, MikeCavaggioni.com. You could find all of my links there for my podcast editing business, my real estate, everything's there.
Very simple. Excellent. And Mike, I really appreciate this. And you've shared a whole lot of information here. I really do appreciate it. With that, I'll let you go, and can't wait to talk to you again.
Yeah, Aaron, it was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you again so much for having me on your show. This was awesome.
Take care.